Our next speaker is Ken Weiner. He's a partner at Goodman's. He's actively involved in Goodman's Asia practice group. He spent 8 months in 2000-2001 in the Hong Kong office, and he continues to help manage the Hong Kong office from Toronto. His practice focuses on corporate finance, securities law, mergers and acquisitions, and international law. He worked local interest. He worked on the merger of JDS Vital and Uniface a few years ago. He's also the project leader of the International Finance Corporation project, working to improve standards of corporate governance among SMEs in Sichuan to enhance their competitiveness and continued development. He's participating in the structuring and implementation of the project, and he'll be involved in the drafting of the final report. He's the past director of the Listed Company Policy and Regulation Department of the Toronto Stock Exchange, where he served in the Market Surveillance and Market Policy departments before joining the Listings and Distributions Division. He's actively involved with the China Business Council, and he's participated in continuing education programs for the Ontario Bar Association, the Law Society of Upper Canada, and other organizations. He's also past chair of the Business Law section of the Ontario Bar Association, and is a former director of the Toronto branch of the Hong Kong Canada Business Association. Ken's going to be speaking today about Hong Kong from a, not surprisingly, legal perspective. Ken?
Thank you. Goodman's is proud to be the only Canadian national law firm with an office in Hong Kong, where we help Canadian companies do business in Hong Kong and China. As I said at the TDC seminar in Toronto in March, we are in Hong Kong because we believe in Hong Kong. It's not a case of believing in Hong Kong because we have an office there. My topic today is the advantages of Hong Kong from a legal perspective. I will not be discussing CEPA, as Mike has already covered it for us. Clearly, Hong Kong is no longer your only entry to mainland China. You can go directly to Shanghai from Ottawa. But at Goodman's, we believe companies investing directly in China, not through Hong Kong, are missing out on a number of important potential benefits. There are good reasons from a legal perspective to still invest in China through a Hong Kong holding company. Remember, since July 1, 1997, Hong Kong is China. We think of Hong Kong as the Delaware of Greater China. Hong Kong is the region with the most sophisticated legal system, the lowest standard corporate tax rate, and the most established financial market. Hong Kong is basically the most modernized region of China in both an economic and legal sense. Just as Delaware is the preferred incorporation for incorporating a company in the United States, we suggest using Hong Kong, a Hong Kong company, is the best way to make an investment in mainland China. Given all its advantages, including the legal advantages I will be discussing this morning, it's not surprising that Hong Kong is still the #1 source of investment into mainland China. It's also worth noting that Hong Kong is consistently voted the freest economy in the world by the Heritage Foundation. As you've no doubt heard the term one country, two systems with respect to Hong Kong. As you know, China has promised Hong Kong will maintain its unique economic and legal systems. Fundamental to Hong Kong is something we take for granted in the West, the rule of law. And here, if you'll permit me, I will digress to a small legal lecture with respect to the rule of law. The rule of law means law is applied consistently to all parties in a predictable way by independent and impartial judges. This is something we take for granted in the West. But the rule of law is what results in your contracts being enforceable in a reliable way, and this is fundamental for business, the reliable enforcement of contractual obligations. A country's legal environment and the rule of law is a crucial consideration of foreign investors. Hong Kong continues to use English common law as its legal foundation and continues to be a rule of law jurisdiction. You may recall this was a major concern at the time of the handover, whether Hong Kong would continue to have the rule of law. Let's compare Hong Kong and mainland China in this regard. The rule of law, including commercial law, has been under development in mainland China only since 1978, shortly after the end of the Cultural Revolution. It was only in 1997 that the Communist Party of China, at its 15th National Congress, explicitly incorporated the rule of law as a basic guiding principle. China now realizes a sound legal framework is critical for economic development and is beginning to understand the rule of law guarantees the enforceability of commercial transactions. China is making progress, but Hong Kong is governed by the rule of law right now. Hong Kong is a rule of law jurisdiction, just like Canada. In fact, in a recent article that I came across, a senior legal scholar in China commented that Hong Kong has an important role to play in helping China develop its legal system by serving as a model system for mainland China. This Chinese scholar concluded that the establishment of the rule of law in China is perhaps one of the largest social projects in the history of mankind and will thus be a protracted and difficult process. Please understand, I'm not being critical of China. I am amazed by the progress in China. But Hong Kong can be your rule of law link to mainland China. Not only is Hong Kong your smart link to mainland China, but from a legal perspective, it is your rule of law link to mainland China. Even if you don't use a Hong Kong holding company for your investments in China, or if you are trading, import-exporting with China from Canada, let me make one point with respect to dispute resolution if you run into difficulties in China. It's our suggestion that you should arbitrate your Chinese contracts in Hong Kong. For obvious reasons, you do not want to arbitrate in China itself. There is a highly developed infrastructure for international arbitration at the Hong Kong Arbitration Center, which is popular with both Chinese and foreign investors. The use of the Chinese language and the proximity make Hong Kong more attractive for arbitration for your Chinese counterparties than Stockholm or London, which are other popular arbitration cities. Importantly, arbitration awards from Hong Kong can be enforced in China because China is a party to an international convention on arbitration with respect to recognition and enforcement of arbitration awards. So if you obtain an arbitration award in Hong Kong, you can enforce it in mainland China. And this is important to note because judgments of foreign courts are often difficult to enforce in China, but your arbitration award from Hong Kong will be enforceable. In terms of enforcement of court judgments, there's a new draft law in Hong Kong that would make damage awards of a Hong Kong court enforceable in mainland China. But that law is not yet in effect. Even when it is effective, our suggestion is still that arbitration in Hong Kong is the best way for you to resolve disputes with your Chinese counterparties. Tax benefits. Any discussion of Hong Kong has to include a mention of tax benefits. The corporate tax rate in Hong Kong is 17.5%. Compare that with 33% in mainland China. Now, this morning, I received an email from Leo Sewell of our Hong Kong office. As you may know, there are tax benefits available to foreign companies that set up WOFIs or joint ventures in China. They don't have to pay tax at the 33% rate. They have 2 years tax-free and the next 3 years at 50% tax rate, 50% of the 33%. Chinese domestic companies are not too happy about this arrangement, and the South China Morning Post just today has an article that foreign investors will be losing their tax breaks in China starting in 2007. There will be grandfathering until 2011 for existing investments, but these advantages will disappear starting in 2007. Makes Hong Kong even more important. That's news hot off the press. I wanted you to be informed today. And that's in today's South China Morning Post, that these changes are going to be happening in mainland China. Think about transfer pricing benefits. If you have a Hong Kong holding company, try to make your profits in Hong Kong, not in China. Having your holding company in Hong Kong allows you to take advantage of transfer pricing opportunities. As I said, this will be even more important starting in 2007. In terms of locating your personnel, personal income tax in Hong Kong is 16%. There was World War III in Hong Kong when they went from 15% to 16%. Compare that with 45% in mainland China. Hong Kong is truly a low-tax jurisdiction. Next is what we call the comfort effect. Some of your customers may prefer to contract with a Hong Kong holding company rather than with a PRC company. There is instant credibility if you have a company in Hong Kong because your customers know that they can rely on the rule of law in Hong Kong. Your customers and other third parties can contract with you in Hong Kong with your Hong Kong holding company using agreements governed by Hong Kong law. There's also what we call the buffer effect. A Hong Kong holding company can insulate your Canadian parent company from any direct liability arising in China. In China, what we call the corporate veil is much more easily lifted than in the West. If there are issues with your WOFE, wholly foreknown enterprise in China, or with your joint venture, it is better to have your Hong Kong holding company brought into the dispute, not your Canadian parent company. There are also significant restructuring benefits from using a Hong Kong holding company. You gain flexibility as a sale of your WOFE or joint venture can be done either indirectly at the Hong Kong level or directly at the PRC level. Let's consider first selling at the Hong Kong level. If you sell your Hong Kong holding company, there is no tax in Hong Kong, only a nominal stamp duty. No government approvals are required for share transfers in Hong Kong. Time-consuming approvals are required in mainland China if you sell at the PRC level. So share transfers can be done immediately in Hong Kong. However, I do need to point out, if your Canadian parent company sells its Hong Kong holding company with a gain, you may be taxed in Canada. So you might want to sell at the PRC level in this situation, even though it's more difficult than selling your Hong Kong holding company. With respect to selling at the PRC level, if you sell with a gain, and let's hope you have profits, it's likely better from a tax perspective to have the seller in Hong Kong than in Canada. There is no tax in Canada if your Hong Kong holding company sells a WOFE or joint venture and all or substantially all of its assets are used in carrying out an active business in mainland China. And remember, there will be no capital gains tax in Hong Kong either on such a sale. This is a better tax situation for you than if your Canadian holding company, if your Canadian parent company holds a WOFE directly and sells it with a gain. Remember, if you sell your Hong Kong holding company, you can also reinvest your profits from low-tax Hong Kong. You don't necessarily have to remit the profits to Canada. Keep the profits in Hong Kong and reinvest them in the region. It's very simple to incorporate your Hong Kong holding company. It's cost-effective, about Canadian $2,500 to incorporate, and can be done quickly. Using the Hong Kong company then makes it easier for you to establish your business in mainland China. Chinese authorities are familiar with Hong Kong companies as parent companies. When you establish your WOFE or joint venture in China, corporate documents of the foreign parent company have to be submitted. Local Chinese authorities are very familiar with Hong Kong documents, and this will save processing time in China. If you use your Canadian parent company as the parent company in China, the Chinese authorities are not so familiar with Canadian documents, and it's going to take you somewhat longer. It's obviously not impossible, but it is going to take you longer to set up in China with your Canadian parent as the direct parent company of the Chinese entity. I'll close with a number of additional benefits for doing business in China through Hong Kong, especially for companies that are new to China, Canadian companies that are going to China for the first time. As previous speakers have mentioned, Hong Kong business people have vast experience in doing business in China. Hong Kong is a much simpler and more transparent place to do business than mainland China. It is much easier for you to find out who you're dealing with in Hong Kong than in mainland China. And I can tell you our Hong Kong offices use Bernard's company to do due diligence on people in mainland China. It's much easier in Hong Kong. There's no comparison. Another suggestion, if you are trading into the region, importing or exporting, go through Chinese companies with branch offices in Hong Kong or Hong Kong trading companies. Having a branch in Hong Kong means a Chinese company is a major step ahead of other Chinese companies. And Mike talked about the Chinese companies that are using his services to set up in Hong Kong. From Canada, it's much easier for you to deal with a Chinese company through their Hong Kong office than trying to deal with a Chinese company that's operating directly only from mainland China. Consider sourcing your Chinese products in Hong Kong, and consider a Chinese partner if you want to export to China. All these are terrific helps to get you established in China. Now, there may be some additional costs trading this way through Hong Kong, but you have the security of dealing with someone in Hong Kong with contracts under Hong Kong law. Remember, Hong Kong, the rule of law link to China. The rule of law link to China. That's our view of Hong Kong. I'll just close the final page with our contact details in Toronto, Vancouver, and Leo Seawald in our Hong Kong office. We'd be glad to help you set up in Hong Kong and with your first approaches into mainland China. Leo is in China all the time. Most of our work from Hong Kong these days is not domestic Hong Kong work, but work involving China. Please visit our table to your left. We have brochures, pens, mints on our table. I don't want to take them back to Toronto. Please take our mints and pens and brochures away with you. I certainly hope you have the chance to visit Leo Seawald in our Hong Kong office. Leo is very knowledgeable about setting up operations in China. In addition, Leo is an excellent tour guide for Hong Kong and the Pearl River Delta, and we'll be glad to show you around. Just one final thought. After our next speaker, please don't ask Leo to locate knockoff purses for you in China. We're not in the knockoff business. Thank you very much.